obviously that they didn't stay communists all their lives. Maybe I'm wrong. What happened with your parents' philosophical and economical outlooks?
It's a good question, and I thought about it for rather often, as a matter of fact. But they never really talk about it much. It's all, the truth is, and again I was thinking about it as we talk this little history lessons, that I was always, at least from mid-60s, secretly ashamed of them being communists, because without any doubt in early 50s they were both very much involved in the party, and they were part of the crowd who wrote about the other communists who were sacrificed by the purification of the party. Slansky, Horakova. Well, Horakova wasn't a communist, she was a social democrat, but she was probably the most famous one of the people who were hanged. And neither Radek or Magda ever talked about it. One summer I found some articles from a weekly magazine where Radek was a editor or assistant editor, and those are pretty embarrassing articles. And Magda, she wrote a theater play called Kristina, and it's a typical, fairly schematic play about love of the partisan and a girl, and I couldn't even force myself to read.
I would like to know, it's interesting to me, how you came to conclusions about communism that were different from your parents. Most children end up, at least starting out in their young lives, believing the same thing their parents believed, and then may separate, usually because something happens that they don't, that changes their viewpoint. So did something happen, or how did you come to the conclusion that communism was not good?
Well, maybe I gave the wrong impression. My political awakening comes when I lived with Dad. I moved in with Dad in 1966, and by that time he was already, I think, a little bit rotten. He wasn't a good commie anymore. Okay, he first time in '67. It was the first time he was allowed to travel outside of Socialist Czechoslovakia. He was able to get on some group tour to Paris, And that was huge for him because, of course, Louvre and other museums in Paris were just for him, who was teaching and writing about modern art and saw most of the things in black and white photography and some color, of course, but suddenly to stand in front of some of those originals, it was huge. And so he didn't really talk against the system, but he talked against some people who represented the system, because some of them were visibly stupid. And
I imagine.
and you know, the truth is that when I somewhere around 1957, 8, probably 8, when I became a young pioneer with a red scarf around on the neck. Well, I was so proud of myself. I mean, you know, it was huge, and I wasn't really involved in pioneer much, other than going to some activities. They were having pretty good courses about the puppet theater. So I went for several years to course and play puppet theater. I really loved the puppets. But I was a avid reader, and in mid-60s and up, a lot of literature was translated from English, German, and so even they were very careful what literature they translate, you still start learning about the different lifestyles. So I think that's where my awakening came. And then, of course, when in '68 people were able to publish a true history of Russian Revolution, or talk about the political jailing of opponents in Czechoslovakia, my hatred started growing. I don't think that my dad or my mom ever got to that level of they still, even when they were banned from the party, I think that certain loyalty to the ideology and because it was part of their past stayed with them. So there we started to diverge a little. When the Russians came, it was a huge disappointment. You need to realize I was 17 and full of vigor, and suddenly this army of young boys in very cheap uniforms came to Bratislava. At that time we lived in Bratislava, and they were as scared as us, so you know they killed a couple of people. I mean, the numbers weren't huge, but even 3-5 people, it was probably more than that. Yes, in 1968 the Russians came to old Czechoslovakia. It's a fairly small country. In the morning or night before morning on August 21st, 1968. And we live in suburbia, so we knew from the radio, we didn't have a TV, what happened. and we both went down to downtown. Radek went to his girlfriend. Maybe she was already his wife, I don't know. He went to Elena's flat, where Elena lived with her mom and grandma. And I just went to downtown streets. Children in those days, it's hard to believe, but we didn't have cell phones. And most of us didn't have even phones at home, so I couldn't really contact anyone. We didn't have a telephone. So I did stop by my then girlfriend's house on the way to the city. Of course, she wouldn't be allowed to get out by her parents, but the interesting things about that day was that we were supposed to leave that day for it's a Czech tradition that when you're 17, 18, junior, senior in the high school, you go in end of August, beginning of September to do the harvest of hops, hops harvest. And we were supposed to be away from parents for like 10 days, just with some other 17 years old. And I was going through the city, just watching things and being part of the crowd. But, and I don't want to make myself any special or so, but I already had some experience with crowd and crowd mentality, and I was very worried about it, aware of the crowd intelligence dropping down to the lowest denomination. And so to this day I see the scene which was absolutely revolting, and that was basically the end of my protesting in downtown, where the crowd, someone from the crowd, and I'm not saying, it was just like a moving, living thing, people moving, there was something interesting, then someone saw something interesting over there, so the crowd and someone decided, there was a drunk, and I don't know the full story, some of it is just thought. Some drunk older man, a vagrant more or less, looking like a vagrant, talked to the soldiers, or tried to talk to the soldiers who were sitting on those tanks, because the main square in the city was full of the tanks. That's what they put strategically the tanks there and looked menacing. Who knows what the poor bastard was even trying to do. The crowd, someone in the crowd decided that he's a collaborator. And 20, 30 people just got on him and started pummeling him. And I would love to say that I was a hero and I walked in and say, you shouldn't do it, guys. But no, I just turned around in certain terror, but mainly just being stomach sick from people, and I left. And that was the end of my demonstration on August 21st. I decided to go home, and that first day the public transportation didn't work, so we lived 5 miles out of the downtown. But in those days that walking wasn't anything. Radek loved to walk, so we walked very often. Radek, as a matter of fact, hated public transportation because he hated the smell of unwashed masses. What a communist. So I went home in one of the main, more or less, roads going from downtown out to suburbies, and that street, fairly wide street, was again full of tanks and army vehicles. And I was the only civilian going there, like an idiot, because there were side streets. Well, I have to go through, and without much thinking. And there was some poster on the ground, and it was face down. And I have no idea why. I pick up the poster and start reading it. But as I turn it, suddenly this young Russian soldier, like you see in movies, that ugly green army uniform with that hat. I don't know how you call those hats. They look like little boats, the boat hat, maybe with a red star on it. And he has this Kalashnikov at me. You could hear the click that he took the safety off and started yelling at me. And even I was learning Russian by that time, probably for more than 10 years. I didn't exactly understand every word, but he was just asking and scared what I'm doing. And I said, "Nichevo," which means nothing. Yes, I was scared, but I didn't have time to be really, really scared. And I'm proud of the fact that I didn't pee myself. Because today I would probably do. And after 30 seconds, a minute, he let me go. But that little story stayed with me for the rest of my life. It certainly added some degrees to my big dislike for our Russian brothers. And of course, when I was away from that part of the city, I realized what happened. I had like a delayed reaction. And I knew, I didn't verbalize it yet, that I'm not going to stay in Czechoslovakia, that I have to get out of that.